Most people don't grow up learning how money actually behaves over a lifetime. They learn fragments, rules that sound solid but don't always hold up. Save more. Don't take risks. Buy property as soon as you can. Cash is safe. Debt is bad. None of these are wrong, they're just incomplete. And incomplete ideas have a way of quietly failing us later, usually at the exact moment we wish we'd understood things earlier. What tends to happen is this: we spend decades working, earning, accumulating, trying to be responsible. We make decisions based on what feels prudent at the time. And then one day, often closer to retirement than we expected, we pause and realize that something still feels fragile, not broken, just exposed. It's not panic, it's more subtle than that. It's the feeling that a single unexpected event could force decisions we'd rather not make. That opportunity might pass us by because everything is tied up. That we've been careful but not necessarily flexible. And flexibility, it turns out, matters far more than we're taught. This conversation is really about that. Not about chasing wealth. Not about beating the market. Not about clever tricks. It's about structure. About how money breathes or suffocates depending on how it's arranged. About why some people seem calm during economic storms while others feel constantly on edge, even with similar net worths. And about how a very old idea, simple, almost boring on the surface, keeps resurfacing across cultures and centuries because it quietly works. There's a strange thing about money that no one tells you early enough. The more of it you lock into a single form, the more anxious you tend to feel, no matter how valuable that form is. You can own a beautiful house outright and still feel uneasy. You can have a successful business and still lie awake at night. You can have a solid retirement account and still feel like you're waiting for permission to relax. That discomfort isn't greed. It isn't fear either. It's an imbalance. Money exists in different states, and those states don't always get along. Some forms of money are solid and slow. Some are productive but demanding. Some are light, flexible, and quiet. When too much weight settles into one state, the others can't do their job, and the system, your system, loses resilience. This isn't about perfect ratios or rigid formulas. It's about honoring the reality that no single form of wealth can carry you through every season of life. Think about land, for example. There's something deeply reassuring about it. You can walk on it, touch it, improve it, pass it down. It doesn't vanish overnight. It doesn't panic. It doesn't refresh itself every second on a screen. Land, and by extension, property, represents stability, continuity, a kind of anchored value that moves slowly and predictably. But land is patient to a fault. When you need to move quickly, it doesn't help much. When circumstances change suddenly, it doesn't adapt. When opportunity knocks unexpectedly, land rarely answers the door. It's not wrong, it's just heavy. And weight, while comforting, limits motion. Now think about productive work, business, trade, enterprise, whatever form it takes in your life. This is the part of money that moves. It responds to effort, creativity, and timing. It rewards attention and punishes neglect. This kind of capital can grow faster than land. It can also shrink faster. It asks more of you emotionally. It ties your identity to outcomes in ways you don't always notice until later. For many people, this is where pride lives, not arrogance, investment. I built this. I understand this. This is where I add value. And that's true. But productivity is fragile in its own way. It depends on markets, health, energy, and relevance. It assumes you'll always be able to show up tomorrow the way you did today. Eventually, that assumption breaks. Not catastrophically, just gradually. Then there's liquidity. Cash near cash, the boring stuff. The money that doesn't impress anyone. The money that doesn't work very hard. The money people feel slightly guilty about holding. And yet, this is the form of money that gives people their breath back. Liquidity doesn't argue. It isn't in demand. It doesn't require timing genius. It waits. When something goes wrong, it cushions the fall. When something goes right, it lets you participate without panic. When life changes health, family, priorities, it gives you room to adjust without tearing something apart. Liquidity is not about return, it's about freedom of response. And freedom of response is deeply undervalued until you lose it. Here's where things often quietly go off course. People don't usually make reckless decisions. They make logical decisions in isolation. Property feels safer than cash, so more money flows there. A business opportunity looks promising, so more capital gets deployed. Markets reward commitment, so hesitation feels wasteful. Over time, the structure yes, 70% here, 80% there. 90% are tied up in things that can't move easily. Nothing seems wrong until movement is required. That's when the cost appears, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a constraint. I could do this if I sold something. I'd love to help, but everything's locked. I see the opportunity, but I'd have to borrow. And borrowing under pressure is rarely empowering. What ancient wisdom recognized, and what modern life keeps rediscovering, is that survival and prosperity don't come from maximizing one advantage, but from maintaining balance across incompatible needs. Stability needs patience. Growth needs risk. Flexibility needs restraint. You can't optimize for all three at once, but you can honor all three simultaneously if you accept limits. That acceptance is where maturity enters the picture. Not the kind of maturity that says settle. The kind that says structure. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're not cornered. When a downturn hits and you don't have to sell. When an opportunity arises and you don't have to scramble. When life surprises you and you don't have to apologize to your future self. That confidence isn't bravado, it's a relief. And relief compounds over time. Another piece that rarely gets discussed honestly is time alignment. People diversify by category, but not by when their money becomes available. They own assets that all mature later. Accounts they can't touch. Properties that require long exits. Businesses that need constant attention. Everything is someday. Someday is a dangerous word. Life doesn't wait for someday, it arrives on random Tuesdays. When everything valuable is tied to a distant horizon, the present becomes fragile. Balance isn't just about what you own, it's about when your options open. This is where education quietly enters the story. Not education as credentials or prestige. Education as capability. Skills age differently than assets. Understanding adapts. Judgment compounds internally. When you invest in learning deeply, seriously, you're creating a form of liquidity that doesn't sit in a bank account but travels with you everywhere. It can't be seized easily. It doesn't depreciate the same way. It often unlocks opportunities long after other doors close. This is why, across generations, families who emphasize learning tend to recover faster from setbacks, not because they're immune to loss, but because they're never starting from zero. There's also a psychological layer to all of this that deserves honesty. Scarcity isn't always about having too little. Often it's about having too much locked away. When everything feels committed, the mind narrows. When options disappear, fear grows louder. When flexibility shrinks, decision-making degrades. Gratitude, oddly enough, interrupts this cycle. Not gratitude as a platitude, but as a discipline of noticing sufficiency. When you recognize that you're not cornered, even imperfectly, your nervous system relaxes, and relaxed minds make better long-term decisions. This isn't spiritual fluff, it's a neurological reality. As people approach retirement, these issues surface more clearly. Income becomes less certain. Time feels more precious. Mistakes feel harder to recover from. What people often want at this stage isn't higher returns. It's peace of mind without stagnation. They want to feel that their past effort still has momentum, but not at the cost of constant vigilance. Balance makes that possible. Not perfect balance, just enough. Enough liquidity to breathe. Enough productive assets to stay engaged. Enough stability to sleep well. It's worth saying this clearly: balance is not conservative. It's quietly bold. It assumes uncertainty. It plans for being wrong sometimes. It refuses to bet everything on a single story. That humility is strength. When people look back later in life, regret rarely centers on not having optimized returns. It centers on moments missed because they felt trapped, on stress carried longer than necessary, on choices delayed because everything felt irreversible. Structure softens those regrets. None of this requires radical change overnight. It unfolds gradually. You stop overcommitting. You let liquidity rebuild naturally. You notice where time horizons are too synchronized. You adjust gently. The goal isn't perfection. It's resilience. At the end of the day, this conversation isn't really about money. It's about how you want to experience the years ahead. Most people don't fear retirement because they expect poverty. They fear it because they worry about losing control, about becoming reactive instead of deliberate, about being forced into decisions rather than choosing them. Balance is what protects against that feeling. Not because it guarantees outcomes, but because it preserves options. When part of your resources are stable, you're grounded. When parts are productive, you're engaged. When parts are liquid, you're free to respond. That combination creates a quiet confidence that's hard to describe but easy to recognize. It shows up as patience during volatility, as curiosity instead of panic, as the ability to help others or yourself without resentment or fear. And perhaps most importantly, it gives your future self room to change their mind. Because you will. Your priorities will shift. Your energy will change. Your definition of enough will evolve. A balanced structure respects that reality. It doesn't lock you into decisions made by a younger version of yourself who couldn't possibly know what life would feel like later. There's no pressure here to overhaul everything, no need to chase an ideal ratio or adopt someone else's philosophy wholesale. Just an invitation to notice where things feel tight, where flexibility has quietly eroded, where a little breathing room might bring disproportionate peace. Good decisions don't always feel dramatic when you make them. Often they feel almost bored, but years later they're the reason life feels manageable instead of precarious. If there's any reassurance to take from this, it's this: you don't need to predict the future to prepare for it. You just need to avoid cornering yourself. Balance doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It makes uncertainty livable. And that, in the long run, may be one of the most valuable forms of wealth there is. Thanks for watching.